Hello, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you happen to be situated in the world. It's a pleasure to see everyone here, or not to see you, but to be able to speak to you. In these crazy times, we have to take every advantage we can to get together and try to keep our communities active and live. So thanks to all of you for taking the time to join and or watch a recorded session. And thanks very much to our friends at Scuba.Digital. We appreciate them doing all the hard work of making this run despite technical challenge and Google flaws along the way over the weekend. I think we've had a great show so far, and I hope you have all enjoyed it throughout. So look forward to getting some of your feedback. And after I finish here, I can answer some questions real time, and then I'll pop over to the GUE booth if any of you want to join over there and ask any other questions. I can hang out for a few additional minutes and chat with you accordingly. So I'm going to jump right in. What I have planned today is I plan to talk primarily about non-intrusive archaeology, using photogrammetry as the primary tool for that activity. And I want first to start with a little bit of an overview on photogrammetry, just a few minutes for those of you who might not be familiar with the technique. It's been growing in popularity, so many of you probably are familiar. But I wanted to be sure before we continue on, and then I'm going to bring in a longtime friend, GUE board directors member for the organization, and also a heavy explorer who does a lot of archaeology and other kinds of diving all around the world. I'll bring Richard in after I give a little bit of an overview, and then we're going to discuss more specifically archaeology and non-intrusive archaeology using photogrammetry as a tool. So GUE have a program, actually, a photogrammetry program, because we were using this so frequently in all of our projects, and it had become really an indispensable tool to the organization. And so we developed a program. John Kendall took lead on that and had a lot of help from Richard Lundgren and others in order to develop this photogrammetry program. And all I've done is sort of pull a few slides out from this class because it was a convenient opportunity to show you there are some programs out there for people interested in this kind of training. Includes academic, field drill, and diving activity, overview of all the details of the program, which I'm not going to spend any time on because it doesn't really suit our purposes, some dives for practice and development, learning how to actually organize the dives, to capture the imagery, and to process the final model. So that's a very complete program. Some performance requirements, which we don't need to spend a whole lot of time with. And now the meat and potatoes of the overview, I wanted to give sort of a history of photogrammetry so everybody's more or less on a level playing field when we start to discuss this in a moment with Richard. Photogrammetry has really been around in concept way back in Da Vinci's days. So this is really just a way to model a particular object and or environment through photographic technique, which became known as photogrammetry. So the recording of photographic material. And so we see some dates on the screen where photogrammetry was developed and refined over the years. As we might imagine, not only scientific but also military background. Tends to unfortunately be an advance of a number of our techniques in the world. But this technique has been around a long time, has grown and developed and been refined, but recent technology has really made it much more practical to utilize this by basically anyone. So now simple computers, obviously the faster your computer, the newer it is, the faster it can process really large models. But generally speaking, most objects can be done with a mid-level kind of performance machine. You'll always find yourself more is better, but not needed necessarily. So before we go on to talk about the non-intrusive part, I just wanted to call out the fact that this is a very useful tool in a number of different environments. So we have mentioned, or I have mentioned several times, its strong role in archaeology, and we're going to talk a lot about that in a moment, so I'll leave that aside, but also can be useful for biological growth and environmental conditions over time. So we've done photogrammetry on objects, man-made objects, to model overgrowth, and also on reefs, and also there are in some limited cave situations as well. Which can be challenging technically, but is also conceivably practical. You can use it for measuring artifacts, for measuring entire wrecks because of the accuracy, which is something I'm going to speak about with Richard in a moment. You have significant millimeter scale accuracy when done properly. So you can actually measure objects, get a perfect, really strong clear sense of size and juxtaposition. You can create tours. We've got a virtual reality tour that John Kendall has created and brings to most of the shows back in the days when we more easily had real life shows, hopefully in the near future. And you'll see in a video that I show with Richard, actually this is something we've installed in Sweden, and the museum that we're cooperating with there, they can also be used for a kind of virtual tour where you can go through and pick objects as you travel around, in this case, a wreck site, and then get a flag up where you can see more about the object and even manipulate it. You can print these as well, create sort of perfect replicas. If you have a big enough printer, you can create a one-to-one replica, which is pretty cool as well. And we'll see some examples of that. And also just to show off to your friends, because it is something that's really quite cool. So the last slide that I have from an orientation perspective is just to mention quickly the process, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about that with Richard. But Agisoft is the main software implementation used at the prosumer level, let's say, beginners and prosumer levels. There's some more sophisticated software out there, but this one works quite well, and it's the one mainly used by people because it's reasonably affordable and manageable. So I think most people tend to gravitate in this direction. And it takes all of the images and automatically estimates the position of objects, comparing size, shape, and relative position, and then calculates the position of the camera, and from that can create a point cloud of all the juxtaposed points, and then it creates a three-dimensional model from that. So lots of images are usually needed. More is not always better, but it does make a pretty big difference in terms of being able to effectively get a really good photogrammetry model. Now this can be compared to photomosaic, in which we were doing a sort of two-dimensional overview and stitching those together. Photogrammetry, we've got a more 3D model. And with photogrammetry, you can, of course, also do all around an object. So if you had, say, a statue or a column or something like that, which we've done, you can do a three-dimensional perspective of that column, and then the user can move around that object in sort of real time and move in and work with the object. So now I'm going to go ahead and bring in Richard. Okay, welcome, Richard. Do I have you here?
Yes, I'm here, Jarrod.
All right. It's great to have you. Yeah, it's nice to see you as well. Thanks very much for making the time. It's always great to talk to you, and especially about one of your favorite subjects. As you know, I've spent just a little bit of time now acquainting our audience with photogrammetry and kind of some of the basic things for those that are not super familiar, but it was a pretty high-level view. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you most about is in particular utilization of photogrammetry in relation to in situ archaeology. Wow, that was sounded famous. It was very fancy sounding. I know you're using a lot of this, and you found it really invaluable in your projects.
Yes, very much so.
Okay, I think the best way to start out would be you've got this really spanky video that's really, quite frankly, really amazing. So I want to let everybody see it. It's only a minute, but I just want to look at that. Sorry, gang, 1 second. It looks like a brief technical problem, which I'm confident I can resolve. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what that's all about. So let's check it out and see how that works. that's just amazing from my perspective. I mean, there's so many cool things going on there. Tell us a little bit about what that's all about. I mean, you're going to be doing, you've got, for those that are interested, your presentation on Mars was on Friday, GMT, what time?
It was GMT, 1 o'clock GMT.
Okay, so those of you interested in seeing the full discussion of Mars can go check the recording out if you didn't catch Richard's original full Mars presentation. But tell us a little bit about that video we just watched.
Yeah, so that's an application that we have built on photogrammetry. And photogrammetry, as Jarrod has discussed previously in this presentation, it enables us to capture reality, to actually present to the audience or the viewer how it really looks down there with a great overview. Both Jarrod and I and many of you viewers, you have been diving on wrecks and so on, and you know what I mean when I say that you can only see parts of the wreck, and then you kind of, in your mind, have to put the pieces together into a big kind of puzzle where you can see the whole thing. And with photogrammetry, we can bring back the whole thing. Firstly, we can recover the wreck up to the surface. We can study it, and that's the beauty of it. And this particular application is for museums. So if you visit the Mars Museum, you can go in and study the wreck and the wreck site in details, and you can use this touch app to touch different areas of interest and get more information and so on. So it's educational also.
So, you know, what we're seeing there is really very accurate. So I think if done correctly, it's really around 1 millimeter of accuracy, and that's quite difficult, I know, to get, but can be done that precisely.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. It's one of the most accurate ways of measuring things underwater, really. Sonars and so on, sound waves is one thing, and lasers is another thing, but photogrammetry is truly unique because it's so accurate.
And when you were talking about not even really being able to see a wreck, I want to pause on that because some people might not really follow the full scope. Like Mars, for example, the visibility is often not particularly very good, and so I've never seen Mars like I see in that photogrammetry section. And that could be true of almost anything. So doing photogrammetry of your archaeological field in very low visibility could turn out to give you a very nice bird's eye view where you could study the situation, the juxtaposition of all of the different elements, where that might be impossible really except by sketch. Is that accurate?
Very much so. And archaeology is a lot about context between objects. This cannonball on its own doesn't make so much sense, but in relationship to other objects around it can tell a full story. And that's what photogrammetry actually enables us to do, to actually see signs of the sinking. Actually, we can see when the hull broke during the battle, when things started to pour down in the early minutes during the sinking, and then we can see how the ship actually moved and then sank and so on. So it's gives an overview that would not happen otherwise.
And with a full resolution model, I know you and I have played with it quite a few times, but really looking at the entire wreck site with the full resolution, you can actually zoom in and see like a cannonball on the side of the ship. Or at least the hole where the cannonball was.
Yeah, you can zoom in. I mean, it's 40,000 images, and every image is 52 megapixels. So if you have a powerful enough computer, yeah, well, then you can see what you would see in a 52 megapixel image. It's totally fine.
And so in this particular case, it's pretty unique because the archaeologists are often not able to study a wreck site like this really at all, because in this case, you know, the Mars is in cold water, 70 meters deep, 2 degrees Celsius, so very hard to access by anybody but very experienced technical divers. And here they can zoom around and see all the relationships. And when we say in situ, in place, archaeology, non-destructive would be an important component as well. And how is that working? Can you tell our audience a little bit about the differences here between normal archaeology and what we're trying to accomplish in this case?
Yeah, to be able to show other scientists around the world, normally you would have to escalate and recover the object to the surface, right? And then the context between objects on the sea bottom is forever lost. So if we can magically do that without even removing the object, then we have done some magic, right? We have saved the context. We can reproduce, we can replicate the object using 3D printers on the surface, and then share this with anyone around the globe digitally. So it's more of a non-intrusive digital archaeology or digital excavation that we're doing. And it's also, of course, costs lots of less money because you don't have to put money into conservation and so on.
Yeah, and raising a wreck like Mars would be kind of rather a nightmare. I mean, we've joked before. I don't remember who told us that first one. Every country tries. Most countries try to raise a shipwreck at least once, and it's usually the only time.
Never again.
Indeed. So on that video, we also saw some color gradient. What was that? Is that depth, or what are the different colors?
We can also, with the photogrammetry, we can calculate mass on the water. So we can color code. It's called the DEM map that we can make. That gives us a chance to see how much mass, how big the surface area the wreck site has, and so on also. So you can calculate. In theory, you can calculate the total weight of the wreck also. Of course, the more different kind of materials you have on board, the harder it becomes. But if it only would be oak timbers and not 100 plus bronze cannons, it would have been simple actually.
Right, and in this case, you can also find a lot about where you might want to go for further inquiry. So if you look at the site and share with archaeologists, how often are you using that in your dive planning sessions?
It's incredibly useful because not only can you give a dive briefing where you can kind of use it as a map and point, you need to go here also, but one of the biggest problems we have with divers underwater is that they find an object and then they don't really know when they come up during the briefing. They say, I saw an object, and you say, yeah, that sounds really interesting. Where did you find it? I don't know. It's kind of, with the photogrammetry map and so on, we have a geofix, we have a geographical location of every object, and as you said, with high accuracy also. So if they don't really remember, they can zoom in and find the object they saw and say, yes, this is it, and then they can compare with a normal photo, and then you go like, yes, this is this object, and then we know exactly where it is, so we know the context also.
Now, the other piece that you mentioned briefly, but I don't know if people caught and may not be familiar, one of the cool things that you did there is you're also showing how it can work with an interactive display. Now, our partner in the museum partner is organizing that. Is that fully operational yet?
That one is operational and it's on the exhibition now. Together with Facebook, we're also launching the VR experience of Mars. They have gamified it a little bit so it could come out on the Oculus platform shortly also. So anyone will be able to dive Mars, and that's our ultimate goal, that anyone should be able to visit this wreck, being scientist or whatever, they should be able to visit it.
Yeah, a lot of really cool research that can be done, really kind of really next generation kind of stuff being accomplished in that regard. Now, we also have a PowerPoint that we were going to run through here briefly at least and check out. So let's look through that. We're talking a little bit about resurrecting Mars. And let's see here. It's not cooperating all of a sudden. Okay, so here what we're talking about, a lot of people don't really appreciate the tremendous amount of work that ends up being done in these particular situations. I hear what you're alluding to.
Yeah, it's always, I mean, in media and so on, usually you have one person that has to front the whole thing somehow, but it's easy to forget that whoever is fronting a big project like Mars is standing on the shoulder of giants, really. It's a big team effort. And in this case, the whole organization GUE is behind a project like Mars, so it's hundreds of people involved actually, and then external people, not necessarily from GUE, but from science institutions and governmental institutions and so on.
Now, we haven't talked about this in a while, so and I don't know if you're still tracking it, but do you have a number for how many man dives we have in total for building a photogrammetry model? Man dives, number of images, any of the wow factor data?
Yeah, it's 1,237 dives.
Yeah, a lot of dives. It might have been cheaper to raise it.
Yeah, I mean, not far off.
Okay, and so now you were looking at a schematic of the wreck. This was done from the photogrammetry, or was this was done just by measurement on the?
It's the traditional way. So 2011, when we found the wreck and when we started trying to bring back how Mars looked to scientists and to the audience, we did it the old way. So we went down with paper and pen and a measuring stick, and then we did 3,000 individual measurements and so on, until we realized that this is going to take us 50 years.
I remember a few of those measurements and thinking that I wasn't very excited about that.
But
it's just like 20 or 50 minutes at a shot, right? It takes a long time in that case.
Yeah, it's traditional style. It's not entirely useless though, as I'm going to mention a little bit later on, because it's used as a quality control effect later on.
Okay. So here, what are we looking at here? Is this the original photo mosaic?
This is this is where you can see different heights. So red in this case is higher up in the water column, and the blue is lower down in the water column. So this is used to kind of see a 3D depth from the top and below, so you can understand the height difference. And Mars is standing up in the stern area, is standing up 13 meters proud of the sea bottom. Many people think that Mars is just flat on the bottom, but that's not it.
Yeah, for sure. There's even penetration to do, and it's good that it's not flat on the bottom.
Yeah.
Still some wreck. Mm-hmm. And now photorealistic. So this is pretty impressive.
Yeah. So this is the first attempt we did with a photo mosaic. So we did the whole wreck with 640 images. Tomek Spectura did that, and that was a tremendous effort. He earned the name Torpedo Tomek because he was filming back and forth doing all of these photos, and this actually opened up our imagination. Oh, it's doable, and people's reaction on this photo mosaic was so well received. So we got excited, and then we said, let's make a 3D model out of this. And people said, no, that's totally impossible, because a photo mosaic should have been impossible. 640 images. If you want to do a 3D model, you're going to have to take 40,000 images. So impossible. And that's why we try to do it.
Never say impossible, right?
Yeah. And this image basically shows then all of these dark blue and light blue squares, as you can see. That's a frozen time when the camera snapped the photo. So here we can see something concealed underneath, lots of camera photos, and we're going to reveal what is underneath there. But basically, it's like cutting a lawn. You have to go back and forth, have a lot of overlap, and then you get this when you render these things. And this is the first kind of rendering of the Mars site in 3D in the software.
Very nice. And this is the AgiSoft software. Does anybody really have a competitive product?
There are some really top. AgiSoft software is probably the best for underwater photogrammetry out there, and it's not so expensive. There are some really hardcore military applications and more civil defense applications also that are used to make models out of cities. And I know one software has been done to make the city of Paris totally in 3D.
All right.
So they are very.
That's the only way you can go now with COVID. So. All right. What do we got here?
And this is for we did this for National Geographic. They wanted to have a video of the wreck in 3D. So this is rendering from that video. And here we have used software called Blender to kind of we can make Mars look crystal clear, but we want in this video for National Geographic, we wanted it to look like it looks underwater, this murky green and these things, and still reveal something. And we put artistic lights like a diver is illuminating part of the wreck and so on. So we try to make this a little bit more, this is not the scientific image. This is more for audience, and you want to show the audience images.
The wow factor.
Yeah. Yeah, and here is that video that the National Geographic ended up using there. So you can see that it's moving around and takes you around the website. We put the diver in there for scale.
That's just awesome. That's really cool stuff. We got to be careful though, Richard. Pretty soon we're not going to need to go diving if we're not careful.
Yeah. No, I think a diver is always going to be needed, I think, because I have an example on why you need to go there as a diver, but I don't think it's suitable for the audience.
Yeah, probably not. And we can see cannons and wreckage and amazing. Very, 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 very cool. And so last couple minutes here before we finish up, these are actually recovered. These are some of the ones that we recovered, correct?
Yeah, you remember that here when we brought this up. So this is intrusive archaeology, the old style. You document objects, so you know the relationship in between them, the context and the water, and then you get a permit, and then you can recover them if you want to show some real things on museum. But this thing comes in pieces. You have the gun carriage here, and you have the cannon to the left, and the cannon is broken, and so on. So, of course, we can use photogrammetry to build a 3D model out of these ones, as you can see here. Then we can even put it together, so we can see how the cannon actually looked when it was on board. And this is the end result. And this is accurate. This is based. This is not just the artist drawing. This is based on the actual cannon that was recovered, actual gun carriage, actual wheel. All of these things are authentic.
And I think that's the big thing. Yeah, I think that's the big thing we want to emphasize. I think people tend to just think of them as a kind of a model, but this is really an exact representation of what's brought up. So very useful for scientific and archaeological purposes.
Yeah.
Very cool. So I think that's an amazing testament to the kinds of work that can be done with archaeology and photogrammetry. Of course, I know we are adding you every year. You're upping the ante at Mars, and except for this year with COVID, but really been able to add a lot of additional technology. Obviously, the photogrammetry can also be done from ROV. How much of that have you tried to do in the past?
Yeah, we have got more involved in very deep shipwrecks that poses environmental threats in the Baltic Sea. So we have developed a technique and developed an ROV system that allows us to do photogrammetry also very effectively with the same kind of accuracy and resolution as on Mars. So during the last 2 years, we have been heavily involved in that and done some really cool projects in the Baltic Sea. The last wreck we worked on, we ended up pumping out 300,000 liters of oil on it. So it's pretty cool also to be working in a different field that actually helps us make the world a little bit safer from the pollution.
So we can merge that conservation and exploration component even more effectively. That's some great work. Well, that's awesome, Richard. I really think that Mars is sort of a tribute to the kinds of work that the sort of pinnacle of what can be done. Obviously, there's lots of things along the way, so people shouldn't get too intimidated by looking at that and saying, oh, I can do that right up the gate. I know how many years it took to develop not only the model, but the expertise and the development. How many years are you guys into it now?
It's 11 years into it. But as you mentioned, it started with zero experience in photogrammetry. Absolutely zero. It started with an idea that this would be really cool, and people said, no, you can't do it. And the first couple of years didn't work at all. We took lots of photos and couldn't make it work. But then we were just stubborn. We saw something in the end. but we started with small objects also. The first thing we did was to print, make a 3D out of one cannon, and then we're able to 3D print that cannon. That was huge successful. So small steps led to the big thing, and nobody starts as an expert. You become an expert by trial and error. And I tell you, we failed a lot, but well, now we succeed a lot too.
Absolutely. I think you've done a great job. It's impressive, and I think anybody watching will agree. If you haven't seen Richard's presentation from Friday, check out the recording of that so you can get a little bit more detail on the Mars shipwreck if you're interested in that. And thanks very much, Richard, for joining Scuba.Digital and GUE. You've been a longtime friend and a great supporter of the organization. So it's always a lot of fun chatting with you, and hope you take care, and I look forward to the next project.
Yeah, take care, brother. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye. Okay, and welcome back. Thanks very much for your patience there. The only way I could manage to get Richard involved was to do a recording with him, as he had some challenges. He was flying to Sweden over the weekend, and between COVID and quarantine, he ended up needing to leave after his presentation on Friday, I guess it was. He left on Saturday. So thanks very much to Richard, and thanks to you for joining. As I mentioned before, I will be happy to pop over to the GUE booth where I'll answer any questions that you might have. I'll hang around there for a few minutes, see if anybody wants to chat about anything. Thanks for making the time to join or to watch after the fact. It's a pleasure chatting with you about some of the great things you can do with photogrammetry, and in particular, the neat things we can do with non-intrusive archaeology, though the spectrum is quite wide on the types of things we can do. And thanks again to our friends at Scuba.Digital for organizing the show and keeping us all connected in these challenging times. Enjoy the rest of the show, everybody. Take care of yourselves, and hope to see you over at the GUE booth. Bye-bye.